Good evening, friends. If we have not met, my name is Kelly, and I am the intern pastor here at Praxis. And I am very surprised to hear that Phil prayed for Pastor Logan tonight.
The only time I will ever hear that in my life. One and done.
But we're so glad that you guys are here tonight. I know that spring break, so some of you guys might be visiting, so welcome if you are visiting. I know that we started this relationship series with singleness 2 weeks ago. And then last week we did dating, which was super fun. And then tonight we are ending our last part of our series on marriage. And as a reminder, we're not saying that this is the exact way that you should be, like everyone should get married. We're not saying that this is everyone's journey for singleness, dating, and marriage. But these are important seasons of life that we felt were really important to share. And we are not experts at all.
Not even a little bit.
But we do believe that there is value in sharing experiences as well as adding the Word of God into it so that you can maybe look at our journey and say, this is something that maybe I relate with or I don't relate with, and maybe God, you can guide me in my journey as well.
The first 2 weeks, if you were not here, week 1 we talked about singleness, and we had 3 main points that we told a lot of stories in between stuff, but the 3 main points were, first one is you got to know God. You have to have a good, healthy sense of who God is and how much he loves you unconditionally, and that in turn will help you know yourself and get to know yourself through therapy, get to know yourself through actually just being single. These chairs are swivelly, and it is not going to be easy to stay still. Sorry.
You can go up a little bit and then stabilize yourself. Yeah.
I can't stabilize myself. Sorry. Okay. So you got to know God, you got to know yourself, and then in turn that helps you know your identity in God and how do we say it? How you relate to your community and to church, and that's how you know. Like, hey, I want to be like for us it was, hey, I know I want to be a worship leader in church, and that helped me know I should probably be married to a pastor because no one's going to want to go to church as much as I do, and it worked very well for us. Second week we talked about dating, and the 3 things we went through were be intentional. Be intentionally yourself and not trying to be someone else, because if you try and make yourself seem better than you actually are, they're going to date you for not who you actually are, and you're not going to be with someone who actually wants to be with you. The second one was communicate, and learning how to communicate well with others and not just focus on getting my needs across, but trying to understand the other person first before anything else. And then the last one was healthy conflict. Conflict, we talked about, can be kind of scary, but if it's all centered on how do I understand and hear the other person, it makes it a lot easier to sit in conflict and just have it grow us and not tear us apart.
Absolutely. And tonight we wanted to share a little bit about how we got engaged, that kind of season, and then our wedding. So this is also, yes, last week we talked about how we met. That's probably my favorite story ever. So I guess our marriage story is my second favorite.
Nice.
It's less exciting.
If you were not here last week, we met right in this corner.
We did.
In November
so it was
of 2022.
Really fun.
Yeah.
And then also my dad worked with my mother-in-law back in 1988. So we figured that out when we first started dating. So it was really special to see our families meet, and especially at the wedding when they got to see each other. That was so special. But I'm getting myself a little ahead of myself.
Yeah, buddy.
Okay, so our engagement, we had started talking about marriage and engagement probably 4 to 5 months into dating.
We met in November. We started talking about marriage, and I knew 2 days after I met her that I was going to marry her. And she knew about a month, 2 months later, kind of in February when I moved out here to Redlands from Ventura County. And we had started, I think the first time she said, I know you're going to be my husband, was late January. And I said, okay, thanks. And
that was your reaction,
shook me
actually.
a little bit. That was exactly what I said.
And when we started talking about engagement, it was exciting, right? Because this is someone that I'm going to make a really big commitment to. And in the back of my head, I would always ask myself, is this the right decision? I think you kind of think of that up until even the day of our wedding. We were both thinking it. We were both like, are we sure we want to go through with this? And every time we asked that question, I could 100% with confidence say yes. This is the person, because we've got to know each other so well that at this point, there's no one else I would rather be with. And that sounds terrible, no one else I would rather be with, but there is...
I heard you meant, it's okay.
This is the one person that I truly felt like God had placed into my life for for a specific reason. And so when we got engaged, I was completely clueless, and we got engaged right upstairs on the rooftop of this building, which was really special. And thanks to Phil for helping us with getting the arrangements for that. But then the big question came where it was like, well, where is our wedding going to be? Because logistically, if any of you guys know, an average wedding today is what, $20,000, $30,000? I see the married people, newly married couple back there. So yeah, it's about $20,000 to $30,000. And we both looked at each other and we're like, that's like a car payment. Like you could just buy a whole new car. And so for us, we wanted to be really wise about how we spent our finances. But at the same time, I was like, at this point, I was 32 years old. I was like, I just want to marry this man. That is probably the most important thing. So I was like, we could go to the courthouse. We could just go to my friend's backyard. I even joked with Phil, we'll just go to your front yard. You have a beautiful front yard with a little arch there. We'll just get married there. And so when it came down to it, we realized we wanted part of our family to be there. And we made a wedding guest list. And I can't remember how many we had.
So as the reigning introvert in this marriage, I was totally fine going to the courthouse and saying, I'm cool doing it today. Like, I knew I was going to marry you from the start. I said, I'm cool doing that. But as the extrovert in the relationship, the one with 1,000 friends in every single place she's ever visited, there was no way that could happen. So we made a little mock guest list. I had 80 people through my whole family and all my friends. I was like, yeah, I think it's good enough. And she had 280.
Sure.
And we looked in the average cost for a 360, I think, 360 person wedding was
a lot.
Horrid.
So much money.
Yeah.
So we decided, okay, I think my priority is to get married to this man in front of my family. That is my priority. So what we decided was we're just gonna get married in one of our closest family friends' backyard. We're gonna use all the Praxis tables and chairs and lighting. And I was like, I have perks from work. We can figure this out. And so Phil was really gracious. I put a tiny little down payment for some of the audio stuff that we used. But we ended up spending, if this is okay to share.
Yeah.
Is this okay to share? Okay. We ended up spending $3,000 for our wedding. And yes, claps for that. But ultimately, we realized, like, what is important to us is just the presence of our community and our family. Yes, we had plastic silverware. Yes, we had, we got
pictures, right,
food.
buddy?
Oh yeah, we got food from his favorite pasta place, and it was just a fun time. So we have a few images from our wedding, and this is at our family friend's backyard in West Covina. My dad insisted on using an umbrella because it was drizzling that day, and he kept hitting my head with it. And so it was this really beautiful moment until I kept getting bonked in my head with the umbrella, and Logan was just standing there looking so cute. So it was just such a beautiful time. And then we converted that area that evening into a space to just enjoy. And this is Praxis stuff, you know? Like, we were really thrifty, and Amazon. So it was a really beautiful time.
Just as a quick side note, if anyone is married out there and you spend a lot more than us, that is amazing. There is no shame in spending $3,000. There's no shame in spending $100,000. Whatever makes your wedding day the most special to you and to everyone around you, that is exactly what we recommend.
Yeah, absolutely. And then later we had a reception up in Seattle for 100 of my other friends in Seattle. So I couldn't help myself. I was like, these are my lifelong friends, and Logan's from the Southern California area, so it was easy to get his friends to our wedding. But one thing that we realized, friends, if you ever do get married, is take that honeymoon right away, because we decided we won't take a honeymoon right away since our engagement was a month long. We'll just plan our honeymoon in a couple months. So the very next day after this, we packed up all the tables, all the chairs, moved them all back to the church. That whole day we were running errands, returning everything. And the day after that, Logan went back to work. So it was just a time where we were like, please take that honeymoon. You're going to need it because it was exhausting, and you just kind of want to rest after that. But it's been now almost 2 years as of June for 2 years of being married together. We've learned a lot of things about each other. But one thing that I have also learned is that from dating and engagement into marriage, I don't feel like a lot has changed. I don't think a lot has changed. I think maybe the biggest thing that I've learned is that I actually don't know.
Good answer.
Yeah, I feel like we've been consistently the same person.
We're going to talk about that at the end, too. But what's our first point?
Oh, our first point. Yes.
Yeah.
So our first point tonight is intimacy. Intimacy is letting someone see your heart and then showing them yours in return.
And just as a continuation of last week, this is also a dating part 2
Yes.
lol sermon.
And there's a little QR code there. If you have any questions, you want to kind of like ask questions or want to kind of have a dialogue, scan that QR code and we will do our best to answer it on Instagram this week on our Instagram at Praxis Ministry. So this is a continuation of dating, but also when you get into marriage, this is something that's really important. And when I think about marriage, there's so many Bible verses that talk about marriage, but my favorite one is probably the creation story. In Genesis 2, when God creates all of these beautiful things, he says, this is good, I create, he creates heaven, he creates earth, he creates the birds in the sky, animals, he creates humans. One human, actually, he created Adam, and he said, everything was good. And then in Genesis 2, verse 18, the Lord God said, it is not good for the man to be alone. And this is the first time we read that something that God created or that God is recognizing is not good. And so then you continue to read this beautiful narrative of how Eve was created. And she's presented to Adam. And at the very end of chapter 2, it says, this explains why a man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife, and the two are united into one. Now the man and his wife were both naked, but they felt no shame. And what does it mean to be naked and unashamed? In the Bible, if you guys ever have noticed, after this one story, for the rest of history, anytime nudity is mentioned, it's usually because of a shameful act. And the response is to hide. But in this instance, we're born into nakedness, and there's no sin, and there's no shame. And essentially, when I was reading that, I was like, this is what marriage is. Marriage is when you are physically and emotionally naked, and you have no shame. Now, as we all know, in the next chapter, in Genesis chapter 3, Adam and Eve sin, and then God is searching the garden for them, calling out their name. And then Adam comes out, and he says, I hid because I realized that I was naked. And this time, his nakedness is exposing something deeper. It's exposing humiliation. But in the last chapter, we read that he was naked and there was no shame. So what is the difference? The difference is that Adam and Eve were living in God's blessing in one, and they were not living in God's blessing in another. And so what does it look like to live in God's blessing? Now, a few weeks ago, I went to Maryland for a class, and I stayed with my cousins out there. Their name is Crystal and Jovian, and they have 3 kids. And they were so curious how I ended up in pastoral ministry, because the last time we had talked was probably like 10, 15 years ago, and they knew Kelly as like Party Kelly. They were like, what? What happened? Like, how are you here to do pastoral ministry? So I shared my story with them, my testimony with them. And to the response of my story, they were like, wow, like you've lived a really exciting life. Like we've lived a really boring life. Like we just got married right after college. We had 3 kids. We're not working our jobs, and it's boring. And I had to change that narrative. I was like, actually, you never lived a boring life. You were actually living in God's blessing. What God had called you to do, you had chosen to take that narrow, difficult road and to go and live in that blessing. And I realized that some of us, I'm looking at myself, need to learn our lesson the hard way. Some of us need to fail Some of us need to be in a lot of pain to realize that we have to let go of a lot of our own selfishness and to realize the things that we want is actually not even for us. Whereas there's other people like Logan who can look at the situation or look at certain things and say, I already know it's not for me, so I'm not even going to be tempted to do it. Now, I understand that at times some of us might say, well, this is right and this is wrong. But you know what's so beautiful about God's view of everything is that if you look at the Bible itself, there are so many people who did my journey. And there are so many people who lived in Logan's journey. And what did God do to both of those journeys? He continually blessed those people. And so I think what's important is to realize that we are all different people. We are all on our own journeys. It's not fair to also compare our journeys with others. But what matters the most is that you continue to strive to live in God's blessings and to learn and to grow within them. Because even when Adam and Eve sinned, remember when Adam and Eve sinned, what did God do? He didn't shame them. He simply held them accountable, and he said, I'm so sad to do this, but now you're going to have to live outside of my blessing, and life will be harder, but I still love you, and you will still have generations after you that will eventually, and this was a prophecy, eventually Jesus will come out of, and all nations will be able to know who I am. Either way, God will bless you.
That's good, buddy. We were going through that this morning, and as she said the line about so many people messed up in the Bible and God continuously blessed them, maybe this is not your view of the Bible, and that's totally okay, but it hit me for a second. I was like, maybe the Bible isn't so much about all these rules that we have to follow and God punishing people who didn't do what he wanted to, but maybe it's more about all these stories of people just being people and God still blessing them and loving them through all of that. What if it's just a whole book, specifically the Old Testament, because the New Testament's all about just Jesus being here and kind of what happened after that. But what if the Old Testament is just about how many people messed up and how many people got blessed in spite of all of that?
Yeah.
It kind of hit me for a second. I was like, that's kind of cool. I like that. Mm-hmm. So she shared kind of some biblical stuff about intimacy. I want to share my views. If it gets kind of awkward for anybody at any point, that is totally okay. If you do not agree with anything I say, please come up to me afterwards or anytime in any part in any future time and say, I don't like what you said. I'll say, tell me everything you have to say. I would love to hear your perspective. This is just kind of my history and my view of what intimacy is and kind of what has worked for us. So, with all that being said, I might look at my notes a lot because we're going to talk about some a little bit serious stuff in a second. And I want to make sure I don't mess up any words. But, you didn't scroll. Okay, we're good. I want to share the most intimate moment of our relationship. And I got her permission for this before. When we started talking, we got into really deep stuff at first. When we started dating, we were very, very interested in each other, but we weren't really holding hands. We weren't hugging them. Like, we hugged one time, and it was so special. I was like, oh my gosh, it's the best hug of my life. And I felt like I was in high school again. I know. So it was actually out here. I came to Praxis for the first time in December 9 of 2022, and Janelle was sitting in my car, my best friend Janelle over here, and she took a sneaky little picture of us in my rearview mirror of just us hugging. That was our first hug. Side note.
So special.
It was so special and so weird. But
yeah, like, why was a hug so special? I don't know. It just felt so.
It sure did, special. Buddy. So we went on our first date, December 12th. I think we hugged once, and we just kind of sat across from each other and talked and got to know each other. But our second date, I sang at church in the morning, and then she had this meeting in the afternoon. So in the evening, we went and got a little bit of dinner together, and we randomly, we've never done this since then. It was just that one day we went and did a night hike at Mount Rubidoux. And I don't like hiking. I don't like necessarily going and doing physical activity in the dark, but we did it. And we weren't holding hands. We were just kind of walking and talking. And I don't remember how this part of the conversation came up, but if you have not been here where she's told her story about her sexual abuse in her past, this was not something I knew about. And we were walking up together, and she kind of stopped for a second, and she told me this story about her sexual assault back when she was in college. And I just kind of stopped for a second, and I didn't super know what to say, but the first thing that came to my mind, I said, do you know who Brandon Lake is? And I promise there's a good ending to this, not just a random, do you know who Brandon Lake is? But just a couple weeks or months before, I saw this video of Brandon Lake and his wife doing this like marriage talk on Instagram Live, and he said that, I think it was before Brandon, if you guys don't know who Brandon Lake is, he's a worship leader, like huge singer in the Christian world now. He said that before he met his wife, she was raped, and he struggled so hard with that. This that happened before, and something that he cherished so much was taken away for both of them. And he said, I was trying to explain this to her right after she told me, and Brandon Lake said, that kind of became our story. It wasn't just her story that she had to carry alone, it became our story. And so I told her that, I said, I am so sorry that happened to you, but, not but, I should say and, I want you to know that you don't carry this alone now. Like, I want this to be our story about whatever you went through in your past. I want to carry with you. I want to be with. And from that second, kind of how I explained it today, we went from liking each other to wanting to be together. From that moment on, we were never not holding hands or hugging or just like snuggling up to one another. That was the moment for me where I got to see exactly who she was, and she got to see exactly how I want to be there for her and take care of her. So for me, that was our most intimate moment. And if you're listening saying, that has nothing to do with sex, you are completely right. So for every little point we talk about, we have this little key that we want to say ahead of time. And our key for this one was, intimacy is letting someone see your heart and showing them yours in return. So I want to add a little bit to that. Intimacy is not sex. Intimacy is everything but sex. So with that in mind, intimacy, without taking the time and understanding to get to know somebody, we skip all of the awkward and scary parts that we might feel because we want to get to the part where we're just in love and we're together and we're holding each other and we're dating and we're wanting to get married. But if we skip that part, we miss all of the getting to know each other, which means intimacy is not as deep of a connection, and that makes sex just meaningless. If your whole goal of wanting to be with someone is to have sex with them, you miss every part of who they are and every part of what God wants for you. So I had this little thing that says, yeah, sex is great. I think we've probably seen all these memes. This chair is gonna kill me. I'm trying to stay still, I promise. You see, yeah, sex is great. But you know what's really great is telling your partner something you're afraid of and having them lovingly comfort you instead of making fun of you. Sex is great, but bringing that person into your family that you're embarrassed of, and then them becoming a part of your family and loving your family just as much as you do. Intimacy is being naked with our emotions and our fears and anxieties and our dreams and our aspirations, and not with our bodies. Intimacy with your bodies comes after all that stuff. It's letting your partner see who you are on a deep level, and I want you to now join me in that. I welcome you into that intimate space, and I want to hear everything that you are and everything you have to say. I had such a good thought, and it just went completely out of my mind. That's okay, though. So, we're going to talk about one subject that is not talked about a lot in church. And if it is, you've probably heard about it the way I grew up in it, when a preacher gets up and he mentions this one word and every single person in the congregation gets super anxious and thinks they're talking about them. We're going to talk about porn. Everyone's excited. I can tell. I love the tension. I have grown up only hearing about porn in church as being the number one thing that will ruin anybody. And whoever watches porn and engages in porn, I've always just kind of heard that, not that you go to hell, but it's never super preached against that. I want to talk a little bit openly about it because I think church is the place where we should talk all about those things. And if it makes you feel weird, if it makes you feel uncomfortable, that's totally okay. I'm not super comfortable talking about this from the stage. But I want all of us as a church, and I want all of us as a Christian and Adventist community to be happy being vulnerable with each other.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the most important things we can do as a church. So here's my views on what porn is. I'm going to read a lot because I don't want to mess up the words that I wrote. Porn gets in the way because it tells us that sex is the end and final goal and that intimacy equals sex. Porn tells us that what we crave is sex and sexual intimacy with someone, but that still leaves us feeling empty afterwards. Mm-hmm. What we actually crave is being loved by someone and having someone accept us after we share all of who we are with them. And the longer we lean on porn to fill that void, the harder it will be to unlearn the habit of sex requires no intimacy and no vulnerability, and that sex is all about me and intimacy is all about me, not how I can love and take care of someone else. Porn is not rooted in reality. I think it's very easy, especially in today's culture, to lean on porn to scratch an itch that we have. Like, I don't want to say the word I'm thinking of because it feels I don't want to say the word horny because it's not really a church word, but there's no other word I can think of to describe the feeling, so I'm just going to put it out there. So when we just want to scratch...
sexual desires?
Sexual desires.
There you go.
Hence why I am not a pastor and why she is a pastor. Sexual desires. So when we have sexual desires, if our only goal is to scratch that itch immediately, that's what porn's for. But that's all you'll get out of it. Like, for anyone who has experienced this at all, for anyone who's experienced one-night stands or any type of sexual activity without any intimacy and vulnerability, that's all you get. And what are you left with after? You're left with nothing. And it's kind of just a quick little dopamine fix. You get what you want, and then you move on to the next thing. But if your true goal is to be intimate with someone and grow in relation and get to know someone's heart and have them get to know your heart and feel taken care of and loved, porn just fully gets in the way of that. And in no way is that saying that porn keeps you out of heaven. In no way is that saying you're a terrible person if you do that. Jesus still loves you if you watch anything in the world. Jesus wants you to feel the love that he has for you, and he wants you to give that love and to feel that from someone else in your life. Mm. So, with all of that being said, I wrote down this thing that says passion versus safety. During one of our talks about past relationships, I had kind of found that my past relationship that I had with someone, anytime, because we dated a couple times, the first little bit of a relationship was so exciting and so like passion-filled, like I love you, I'm so happy you're with me now. And then once that would die off, the honeymoon phase, it would just kind of get boring, and she would then go find that with somebody else. And that happened multiple times. And I thought I was fine after that, but then when we had all these talks about past relationships that she had, I was thinking in my head, like, what's gonna happen if you and I date and get married and the honeymoon phase is over? Are you gonna leave me? Are you gonna go wanna find someone else? And I realized that I had this deep fear of passion. And in talking with her, I realized that someone who has experienced passion just wants safety. You just want to be taken care of by somebody. You don't necessarily need the honeymoon phase. You don't need to feel passion to feel in love. You just want to be taken care of and you want to be safe.
And we've never left the honeymoon phase.
We're waiting.
We're waiting to leave the honeymoon phase. People are like, oh, it's okay. You're gonna get out of the honeymoon phase eventually. And I'm like, I still am obsessed with Logan. And because he makes me feel so safe, I can truly be myself around him, I truly feel like we've never left the honeymoon phase.
Yeah, buddy, we sure haven't. So, when we understand that porn makes us believe that sex requires no intimacy and only focuses on us, there's two main areas that I think it can help us with in the future, and that is self-control and respect. Mm. Porn is something that guys and girls both struggle with, but this self-control area, I want to speak specifically to guys. Not because I think you are horrible here, but I hear so many stories, not of you guys. So if this does not pertain to you and you already know this, say yes, give a smile. You don't have to say anything at all. But this is probably the most important thing if you get nothing else tonight. If you ever hear the word no, or stop, or don't, that is your sign to do nothing else at all. No means no. Stop means stop. don't mean don't do that. Regardless of any joke you might think you're playing, regardless of any amount of humor that's going on, if it's any type of like funny situation, if a girl says no, I will be tickling her and I will be having the absolute best time. The second she says stop, I stop.
True.
The second she says no, I could be making the funniest joke in the world. She says no, stop, I'm done. We're married. I know she wants to be with me. I know she's going nowhere. I still want to respect that. Just because a girl is interested in you does not mean you have consent to do whatever you want. And you only progress in your relationship, you only progress physically if you have consent. And consent is not someone saying it's okay. Consent is not someone saying, all right. Consent is you guys stop what you're doing, you look at them honestly, and you say, hey, is this okay? Are you okay? We're gonna stop until you say this is okay. And if you want to move forward, you look at me and tell me honestly, yes, I want to do this. And that's for everything in life. So that's self-control and respect. If we understand that porn is just a little itch-scratching thing, I think it helps us see a lot of sex is actually not just about me. Sex is about someone else. Sex is about how do I know this person so intimately and deeply on a Christ-centered level, on a loving level, on a marriage level, whatever it is, and sex is kind of the byproduct of that.
Yeah.
It's an afterthought. And before we ever had anything physical, before I told her I loved her, I said, before I tell you I love you, I said these exact words, I want you to know by every single one of my actions that I love you. That when I tell you, it will not be a secret. But the first time we say it, it's just known.
Yeah.
And that comes with emotional intimacy.
Yeah.
With emotional vulnerability.
I feel like listening to Logan talk about this too is so incredibly healing for someone who has also been sexually assaulted in the past and has had these instances, and to know that my partner is so passionate about this, to see where God has guided us. Friends, like, I remember writing a list of things that I was hoping that maybe God would find in a man for me. And Logan is everything that I couldn't even dream of getting one day. So it is truly so healing and so beautiful to hear what Logan is sharing. And I think it's so important to remember, like, women have been used for their body for centuries. I mean, since the beginning of time. Even in the Bible, women were just kind of objects. They didn't really have any part of society except to bear children. And in John chapter 8, there's a story where Jesus is presented with a really sticky situation. There is a woman who is caught in adultery. And it says that it was just a woman who was brought to Jesus. Now, if you read the Levitical laws, anyone who is caught in adultery, both man and woman, have to be presented. But in this case, we notice that the Pharisees are kind of setting up Jesus for a trap. So they bring this woman in, they throw her on the ground, they say, Jesus, we've caught this person red-handed, and this person's been committed adultery. And remember, friends, when we say anyone is nude in the Bible, it's typically because of a shameful act. So if they just caught her committing adultery, then she is naked and she is full of shame. And what does Jesus do? Jesus doesn't simply look at her and say, you're disgusting, you get out of my sight. Instead, he looks around and he says, anyone who has not sinned can throw the first stone. And slowly, each person walks away realizing that they are all sinners, and Jesus is just left with her. And although she has done the less than ideal, which many of us will do, I think that is life. A lot of us will do the less than ideal, and yet God makes concessions for us. God concedes, and instead of casting condemnation on us, he provides loving healing in the midst of our shame. And that is truly intimacy. So when we understand true intimacy, we find it's a lot easier to focus our energy on loving and caring for our partner rather than how they can satisfy us. And so when we feel naked and unashamed, the same way that we do with God, that is how we should experience it with our spouses in marriage. which leads us to our second point.
And our last point, because these sermons have been long, and we're so sorry. We're so passionate about this stuff, and we get very carried away. So we have 2 points instead of 3.
And this point is marriage is dating, but amplified. People will be exactly who they are when they get married, as they were when you were dating. If not more, it's just gonna be amplified. I remember in the past when I would date people and I'm like, will this just continue? Like, am I just with them for their potential? And when I got married to Logan, people have asked us, like, how's marriage? Like, how's it been since you've been married? And I honestly feel like nothing has changed besides we live closer in proximity to each other, and Logan just tickles me a lot more. Like, there's more downtime for him he's a huge troll at home. And so what I've learned is this is my safety mechanism. If I don't say stop, I'll say, ouch. So if he tickles me, I'm like, ow, that hurts. And then he'll stop because he's like,
but I'm catching on now.
Yeah, I know. So he's catching on. He's like, it is not actually hurting. But I feel like if anything, we've just learned to be more in love with each other. We've learned to be more trusting towards each other every day. And because we were so intentional and authentically showing who we were since day one, like I had to be completely myself and be vulnerable and share all these vulnerable things with him. And I was authentically who I was during our dating season. It made living together and existing together just feel so natural. Life is so hard, but the easiest thing is our marriage. And I had always heard, like, marriage is so hard, marriage is so hard. But I realized that because we were so intentional in being content in our singleness and being alone and being happy with who we were and the stage that we were in, that I was so content that when I was in dating, I was also so intentional in my dating to show Logan who I really was, that I left no stone unturned. Like I had to show him all of who I was. That now living in marriage has made it so much easier for this transition. I think this has made our lives, thankfully, easier, which I've noticed, like I'm now reaping the benefits of. Like I've been dreaming of a day when maybe the person that I end up with will come with me to church and will just sit at church and at least listen to some of my sermons. And maybe they can be on stage with me once in a while. Like I had such low expectations for who my partner would be. But I think God knows the desires of our hearts. He created us. And if he created us, then doesn't he want what's absolutely best for us? And if you don't live your life intentionally now, whether you are single, whether you are dating, whether you are married, it's truly never too late to start. I think in every season of my life, I've always asked God, like, how can you change me? What can I learn about myself in this season? I think the scariest thing is to realize that, like, oh, wow, the reality of who I am, I'm actually not that patient. Oh, wow, I'm actually really selfish sometimes. Oh, wow, like I need to make a lot of changes in my life. I think that's why it's so important to sit in that waiting time and that intentional time of singleness and of dating. I think each day we look to God as an example to live life. And the best example is to look at God in flesh, to look at Jesus's life. And I think what Jesus' life looked like was not really like, oh, I'm just going to read my Bible when I'm going through something hard. Or, oh, I'm just going to pray when I need an emergency line. I think of Jesus' life as an intentional way that he went to every conversation he had, it was intentional. And it was a life of suffering for the sake of God the Father. If we expect life to be easy because we love God, if we expect marriage to be easy because we both love God, that's actually not reality. And in fact, that's not what Christianity is. Because Jesus' life is about surrendering all of our desires and putting it at God's feet and existing in that space of surrender. When you do that in your singleness and your dating, you're going to do that with your spouse. I actually wrote this down for 1 Corinthians 7, verse 4. And it says, the wife gives authority over her body to her husband, and the husband gives authority over his body to his wife. I think of this so much more than just like physical intimacy. I think of it as like surrendering all of my desires, surrendering my whole life, surrendering all of who I am, and surrendering it to not only God, but also to my spouse, because I had made this covenant promise with him. And I recognize like, hey, we have healthy communication. We have healthy conflict, which is great. But at the end of the day, we still don't have a perfect marriage. There are still things, I think when you get married, you realize like, I have so many things I actually do need to work on. Logan is 1,000 times more patient than me. But in my family, I'm the most patient one in my whole family. And then when I meet Logan,
That's scary.
I am like, I'm not a patient person at all.
No.
Thanks for ratting me out, BB. But I realized that the most important thing is, even though like we're not in a perfect marriage, I don't think that actually exists. We continue to strive for perfection. And in order to do so, it's not healthy communication. It's not actually healthy conflict. It's actually praying every single day and fighting for our marriage.
And honestly, really quickly, probably one of the biggest things is holding each other accountable. That's one of my favorite things about her. If I say something real dumb, she'll tell me if it's dumb. And I think I mean, this could be in friendships when you're single, this could be dating, this could be anything. If you don't have someone to hold you accountable and kind of check you when you do something that's probably not that good, that's something that is very important in growing and just becoming a good human.
Yeah, I think there's a balance between holding someone in truth and in grace. If you just have grace, then what you do is you kind of look at those parents who maybe never like keep their child accountable, so they're just screaming and they're crying and they get to do whatever they want, and they just say, oh, like Billy's just such a good kid, and you see the kid like literally like breaking Barbies in half and like ripping the head off, and you're like, oh gosh.
Good analogy.
Thank you. But that's like holding someone with too much grace and not enough truth. Whereas if you just have truth, 100% truth, and you're constantly berating someone for what they're doing, you don't have enough grace. So I think what Logan said is so beautiful, having that special balance of truth and grace. There's this amazing speaker named Christine Kane, and there was something that she said in a sermon recently where she said, if you want to drift away from your spouse, you don't actually have to do anything like an affair. All you have to do is nothing. If you want to drift away from God, you actually don't need to do anything crazy. All you need to do is nothing. And when I think about this, it's so true. I've seen friends forget to pray over their marriages and to forget to fight that faith. And I see how it disintegrates a lot of the relationships that they have, whether it's with God or their spouses. And I'm reminded that every time I read the Bible that Jesus withdrew often to pray. And friends, this is God in flesh withdrawing often to pray. And it reminds me, how much more do we need to pray? How much more do we need to be intentional in our marriage? And if we are intentional in our singleness and in our dating, how much more do we need God in our marriage? Ultimately, our prayer is that your marriage will be life-giving, or your future marriage will be life-giving, and it'll be a reflection of the kingdom. So when you fight, when you suffer, when you serve each other, when you serve others, when you live out your life, when you go out in the world, our hope is that you can ask yourselves, how does my marriage, how does my singleness, how does my dating life, how does my relationship reflect the kingdom of God?
Dang, that was good. I like that.
Thank you, BB.
In my last relationship before I was single for 8 years, I was a couple months away from proposing, not because that was the healthy thing to do, but I had been in love with her for 6 years, and we were dating at the time, and that was the next logical step. Like, you're in love, you date, and you get married. And I remember very specifically telling my mom, kind of maybe a couple weeks before we actually broke up, I said, I know I'm going to marry this girl, but we're going to have to do so much therapy to get to the place where we're going to be healthy if we're going to be married. And she kind of looked at me and she said, that's not a good place to be. And I said, you're very right. And that's why the relationship ended. But that whole time of being in a relationship like that I just didn't feel safe in, I didn't feel loved in, I didn't feel cherished in, that's what I thought marriage was going to be like. And so that's why I was single for so long. And I remember telling both my parents and just everybody, it's like, if relationships are like that, I don't want to be married. I'm happy being alone. I don't have to worry about any of that stuff. Why would I live in stress like that for the rest of my life if I could just be happy and single? And she would always tell me, when you meet the right person, it will be so easy. It will be so easy. And I said, nah, you're wrong. It cannot be that easy. And she was right. It is, as she said, life is very hard, and life is hard in so many ways, but our marriage is the easiest part of life. And it is the safe place we come to when we get home. It's the safe place we live in. It's the safe thing that we pray over every day. So keeping that in mind, there's a couple things I just want to say about, because I think the question is out there. One, how do you know if the person you're dating is the one? How do you feel safe with someone thinking that and wondering if they're going to be the same person like as you're dating, if they're going to be when they're married? One is I wrote it here. I said you can never do this. I don't want to say that. You can do whatever you want. Oh, that was cool. I wrote it down as you can never, but you can do whatever you want. But I'm just going to say it like this. You can never marry someone's potential. You're marrying exactly who they are right now. With that in mind, if I only say this because I've heard so many stories about this. If your partner does not come to church with you while you're dating, they're not going to come to church with you while you're married or after you get married. If the only caveat to this, I wrote down career versus character. If you're dating someone who's in med school and you're waiting for them to become a doctor to get married because that's really hard to be planning a wedding while you're in school and all that stuff, that is okay. That's something that's very much outside of your marrying someone's potential. But character is something that stays the same. Amen. It is very unwise to date someone who you don't trust their character and feel safe around them, thinking that marriage is going to fix that. Mm-hmm. They're going to be exactly who they are while you're dating, when you guys are going to get married. I love the snaps. I feel so supported. Wow, this is empowering. I've gotten people singing back when I sing on stage, but hearing preach it when I preach, oh my. Whew. This feels good.
Now you got 30 more minutes. Shoot.
No, I promise it's not going to be that long.
I'm just kidding. Logan can't even talk that long.
No, I cannot. So, with that in mind, much like my last story, being in love with someone is not a good reason to get married. You can be in love with someone, but marriage is not the next logical thing to do. Just because you've been dating for a long time does not mean marriage is the next step. Wanting to have sex with someone so bad, but only believing that you can have sex once you're married is not a good reason to get married. And if you want to have sex so badly that you're willing to rush a marriage and a whole life together, then it's probably important that you talk to a therapist or a pastor about that. And not just simply say, okay, I'm going to get married because I have to have sex. It's also not healthy to just say, I'm never going to think about sex again. Sex is a beautiful thing that's meant to be shared with someone who you want to spend your life in and who you want to be deeply and personally and emotionally intimate with. And if we just shut that off and say, I'm never going to think about it, that's really hard to turn on when you get married. It's really hard to go from 0 to 100 and you're 30-something years of life, you never think about sex because the church tells you not to. That's really hard to snap out of that. So, if you struggle with finances and spending money, that will only be amplified when you and your spouse are sharing a bank account. If you have issues controlling yourself while you're single or you're dating, they will only get worse when you're married. Having a really big sexual appetite when you're single and when you're dating does not mean once you have sex with one person and you're married, that does not mean that will go away. And I think that's a very big misconception, and I think that's where a lot of people get in trouble. Have you guys ever heard of Carl Lentz? He was the huge pastor with Hillsong, New York. Man, I got no raised hands. Oh, thank you. Thank you, and I feel better now. So, if you don't know his story, he was this huge pastor, super famous. He was Justin Bieber's pastor. He was a lot of people's pastor. I love that that's how people know him, is Justin Bieber's pastor. So, he was very famous, and then this huge scandal came out that he was having an affair with a woman, and the woman came out and said, I've been having an affair. And then it came out that he had lots more affairs. And then it came out that he was doing stuff with his nanny who was working with his kids. It was a huge scandal. He got fired from Hillsong. It was this really big deal. And we just watched a documentary that came out, I think it was last year or the year before, where he came on camera for the first time and talked about it. And he said, now that I'm in therapy, I realized that I was sexually assaulted as a child, and I never dealt with it. And I realized that I had a lot of addiction issues, whether it was drugs and a sexual addiction. He said, actually, sexual addiction rarely has to do with sex. It's just that's how it gets manifested. And he said, I went through a lot of therapy, and oh no, I lost the exact reason why I went into this story. What was I saying?
Well, I think it's because he thought
I got
that
it.
marriage
Yes.
could fix everything.
So he said, growing up, I had always heard about you're in love with someone, you date, and you get married. That's like there's no single pastors up front. To be a pastor, you have to be married, and that's the only way that life goes. So he said, okay, I have these issues in me, and I've always heard that marriage is going to fix that because you have to be with one person, and it will just go away. And he realized that it did not go away. So if you have issues with self-control, just like he did, those will not go away when you get married.
It gets magnified.
Marriage does not fix issues, it magnifies them, which is why it's so important when you're single. This is the time to figure out what those issues are and not just say, all right, these are my issues, I'm going to live with them. Mm-hmm. You find someone to help hold you accountable. You come talk to one of us. You come talk to Pastor Phil. There's so much prayer you can do in that, but much like the story of Carl Lentz, even like just getting to know her and so many other people, I'm blown away by how many people have some type of sexual abuse in their past. Blown away. And I've known so many people who had that happen in their past, but they never wanted to talk about it again, which I can fully understand why. But if you've never heard this before, or if you're kind of wrestling with it, therapy is the best thing in the entire world. Having a therapist that you trust, or even just kind of a little segue between that, some kind of a pastor you trust, having someone who can help you process those issues and not just sit in them, but learn how to process them and actually build a beautiful, sustainable life outside of that is the best thing you can ever do in your future.
Yeah, absolutely. That was so beautiful. Thank you. I think, friends, this was a lot of information, but it isn't that we want to discourage you from getting married. Hopefully we didn't scare you guys, but really it was a way to show you how intentional we have to be in every season of our lives, so that when we do get into marriage, that we are really thoughtful and intentional and know why, the exact reason of why we are getting married. I know sometimes people might think, well, marriage will fix this. They get married and they say, well, kids will fix this, and they have kids, and it doesn't get fixed. And so we just want to really push, be with someone that you can't get enough of, that also shares the same values, the same beliefs as you do, that honors who you are, respects who you are, and also wants to share that emotional intimacy with you before anything else. I think when we recognize that our partner won't change just because we're married, it teaches us that we need to work out our concerns when we're dating, because once we're married, it's going to be so much harder to make those changes and to make any of those difficult inner work things to work out. I think this is the last final thought of our
Cam and the
sermon
band, y'all
series.
can come up.
I hope that you guys have at least taken something out of it, whatever season of life that you're in, whether you are single, dating, or married. But we realize that we can't do this on our own. We have to actively invite God into every season of our lives. When I was single, I actively invited God into my life. When I was dating, we actively invited God into our relationship. And in our marriage, I think there are so many more reasons why we should be on our knees and praying that God will continue to protect our marriage as well. And if we set up ourselves for success in our singleness, and what you prepare for in your marriage will benefit you so much more when you get married. I also highly recommend premarital counseling. It was really eye-opening and beautiful to ask the questions. We had Pastor Randy Roberts do our premarital counseling, and he simply presented us with questions that we had to fill out on a questionnaire. It was questions like, in your family, who did these chores? And then in your life and in your married life, who is going to be doing these exact chores? And then also, like, what is your view of finances? What is your view of having a family? Does your family approve of your person? Do your friends approve of your person? And it's so thorough. And I got out so much good conversation between both of us. And I appreciate it so much more that once we had these conversations, it helped continue to reiterate the fact that this is the right person for me. I think that's all for tonight. I hope that this has been beneficial to you guys. If you want more dialogue or anything, please scan that QR code. We'll be answering any of your questions throughout the week. But ultimately, friends, we hope you know that God loves you in whatever season you're in, that he sees you, that he desires intimacy with you, and that he truly just wants you to open up your heart in whatever way that might be. I don't know if you have any walls up right now or any doubts, if you're holding on to any fears. Friends, I know that God will continuously chase us, no matter how hard and how long it will take. He is there for you. He is there for me. And if this story can happen to us, it can happen to any one of you as well. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, God, we thank you for this night tonight that we could share our journey of what marriage has been like. It's been a beautiful journey to recognize that we're just continuing dating, that we can continue our life together knowing that you are in the center of it all. And God, I pray over each and every person here tonight. I don't know what they are going through. I don't know what season they might be in. But God, you do. And so I pray that you will continue to walk with them. Lord, will you just give them your wisdom and your discernment? God, if they're searching for an answer, would you reveal yourself to them in whatever way that might be? Maybe it's a conversation with a friend. Maybe it's opening up the Bible and reading something that's so powerful that they go, wow, God, that's you. You are speaking to me through these pages. God, maybe it's going to church and connecting with a community. Lord, you created us to be communal creatures. You didn't intend for us to do life alone. And so I pray, Lord, that each person here will be able to connect with their community, that they know that they are loved not only by the people around them, but the God who created them. Someone who will see a broken person and not throw shame on them, but fully love them in our brokenness and in our shame, Lord. You come and you sit with us and you say, I love you, and I promise you I will never leave you. What a beautiful God we worship, Lord. Be with us tonight. In your name we pray. Amen.